Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this 8th series of the Strathmore Business School webinar. Today, we will be discussing a topic that is close to our hearts, right? Topic about food security. And before I start, I would like to showcase to you the eminent panelists that we have today. I was going to introduce them, but I'm going to throw this to them. Actually, they didn't know this. I want them to introduce themselves briefly, very shortly. Everybody just introduce yourselves so that you can do justice to who you are. Introduce yourself briefly before we start the webinar. I'll start with Dr. Njenga. Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 8th series of our webinars as a service to society to give all of you a chance to rethink some of the economic issues and to prepare for them. I am the Dean, Executive Dean of Strathmore University Business School. Besides that, we have developed several institutes, including the Institute of Agribusiness at Strathmore University Business School, Strathmore University. And I also support quite a number of agricultural practices in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ari. Next, please, Kirwa.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is William Kirwa, a lecturer and a doctoral fellow at Strathmore Business School, Strathmore University. I am also a consultant in agribusiness, and I advise in the Institute of Agribusiness in Strathmore University. I've had experience in the agricultural sector from being the CEO of ADC, Agricultural Development Corporation, and also some experience in banking, where I headed some banking branch of Premier Banking in Berkeley. So I do consultancy in areas of agribusiness and strategy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dominic, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dominic Menjo. I'm a food security advisor, currently working in the national government, residing in the office of the president. And I'm also a consultant, mainly in the area of dairy, but I also support counties in developing county agriculture strategies, and mainly dairy, but recently on avocado, rice, maize. Basically, we would like to see counties to have value chain-based strategies to support issues on food security.
Thank you, Dominic. Moses, please.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Sorry you can't see me. It's my bad hair day. Yes, my name is Moses Nyabila. I work with EU delegation, even though today I'm not talking on behalf of EU delegation. I just be talking in my private capacity. Up to last year, up to 2 years ago, I was working with the Ministry of Industrialization, looking after agro-processing as an advisor. So I've been in government, and I've also been in private sector, worked closely in the dairy industry, ran a number of projects and programs. And generally, I'm an activist when it comes to dairy matters, and as well as agro-industrialization. So I look forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses. And finally, David.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Miner, and I'm a practitioner in agribusiness, the wider food security issues, but an expert in dairy production investments. Currently working at Performata, which is a dairy advisory company. At the same time, I have a lot of collaborations with the Strathmore Business School, and I'm also a student right now of the Master of Management in Agribusiness. I have had quite a bit of industrial involvement with or sectoral involvement with Dominic and Moses, and I think it's also a good idea to now begin to relate these issues together at a Strathmore platform. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you, David. And my name is Dr. Denis Mujibi. I am a business person. I run a company called Usomi Limited, but I also teach as an adjunct faculty at the Strathmore Business School. I teach farming systems. I'm very excited to welcome you here to this discussion today. Like I said, this is something that is close to our hearts. So before we begin, let me put some opening statements. As the rest of the world is sheltered in place, afraid of the pandemic brought about by the spread of COVID-19 virus, much of Africa is sheltered in place, afraid of a more sinister pandemic, the hunger pandemic. Even before the emergence of the three plagues of locusts, floods, and COVID-19, Africa had a precarious food security situation. Here in Kenya, we've always struggled with low food sufficiency. COVID-19 has brought to the fore the real vulnerabilities inherent in our food system. So granted, the disruption of food availability in Kenya and other African countries is not as bad as other countries in the West. However, this now silent epidemic of grumbling stomachs and people sleeping hungry has exacerbated and joins many other silent epidemics such as TB, malaria, HIV, postnatal mortalities, and others, which kill thousands of people each year. Mid last year, there was a warning that a locust invasion in the Arabian Peninsula, not seen in a generation, was moving towards the Horn of Africa. Yet still, when the locusts hit in November, December last year here in Kenya, we were still caught flat-footed, scrambling to find pesticides and spraying strategies. The meteorological department warned us of above normal rainfall, a pattern we observed much in 2019. Yet still, despite this warning, we still have hundreds of lives that have been lost due to floods, mudslides, and associated effects. So COVID-19, right, has buried our response in a barrage of restrictive strategies, some of them punitive, in a bid to limit the spread of infection to the population. This response has hit hard people's ability to earn a living, with multiple businesses that depend on human traffic destroyed. Okay. So food prices and food scarcity have been previously a cause of riots and social unrest. We right now are teetering close to a precipice, given the potential disruptive functions or abilities of flooding, locust damage, and the loss of jobs that we're seeing right now. These effects, together with the contracting of the economy, is going to have a bigger and longer lasting effects than any health effects of COVID-19. So how do we get ourselves out of this quagmire? How do we build more resilient farming and food systems capable of agility and resilience in future shocks and disruptions? Now, this is our topic today. Join me in welcoming our panelists and we start our discussion. So Dr. Njenga, we should have seen this coming. There have been warnings. All the signs have been there that something is happening that we need to be ready for. Be it floods, locusts, and even COVID, we had 3 months of seeing how it is moving. Why didn't we see this and update our responses?
That's a difficult question, Dr. Mujibi, but I think it was on December 17th, 18th, when we discovered publicly that the locust invasion, that is other than those affected, that the locust invasion was going to be serious, but nobody took it seriously. And I think it took the international media, more specifically, the Food and Agricultural Organization, I think. There was the BBC, there was the Guardian, and there were a number of other international media who spoke about a famine disaster going to happen in East Africa. At that moment, the FAO asked for about $76 million to safeguard the livelihoods of many by spraying and getting the aerial spray. This is the locust invasion which you have asked about. Okay. And the beauty for us Kenyans is that we were saved. And we were saved because the locusts attacked significantly around the latter part of February and March. Still there, we still have the eggs, and we are fearing for the second invasion in June. I don't know whether the government is aware about this, but it seems they are aware, and the government has issued a warning that they will actually control. 2 planes and more than 20,000 liters of petrol and more than 10,000 liters of pesticides were used by the governments to control the effect of the locusts. And they controlled it, but apparently in the next 1 week, probably we will see the full impact of locusts in the country. Now you ask me, why did we not foresee it? No, we foresaw it. And sometimes when we use the word we, it's very difficult to answer that question. The government foresaw it. The government does not have all the capacity to control pests. The government has many priorities for securing economic well-being for its citizens. The government is not rich. It's significantly a struggler in the market economy, although a reasonable one. And therefore, it's very hard for us to say we were not prepared and we did nothing. No, we in fact effected. I remember, the only questions I have are, for instance, the USAID gave us $8 million. It gave Ethiopia 0.8 or $800,000. Kenya, it gave $8 million. Kenya provided for the control by about $2.3 million. I don't know how they manage this cash business, but between you and me, I think the necessary government instruments were ready. Now, that is from a Kenyan perspective. I don't know about the second wave that is going to come around June, but the first wave met the crops already mature. So in effect, since locusts eat green matter, we were not seriously hit. Okay, I know some people tried to give an estimate of 0.8% drop in GDP because of that. It could be right, I don't know. I have to wait for the report from the government. I don't know. It's a political situation sometimes. But from an African perspective, we saw the mapping of the locusts from Yemen, but that was only one wave. There was another wave through Egypt through Egypt from Saudi Arabia, which attacked the upper part of Africa, that is Sudan, Ethiopia, and apparently going westwards to West Africa. I looked at the maps that were designed to show the movement of the locusts, and generally they were going towards Egypt, Niger. That is where they were going to die. Were we aware of what would happen? From an Africa perspective, normally we spray the locusts in Ethiopia. So the first effect of locusts moving through the Red Sea into Ethiopia, we control them in Ethiopia. And I remember going to Ethiopia in December, and I asked, are you guys controlling the locusts or they have escaped your hand? And I was talking to some senior business and government officials, and they generally said that this time, this was the sad tale, this time, I don't think we sprayed the locusts. Okay. So, but if you look at that, Bwana Mujibi, you can ask yourself, is there any relationship of crop health that is Pan-African that can enable the government of Kenya meet regularly with Egypt, with the Ethiopian government to control the locusts as soon as they hit the Ethiopian border? So I am not too sure.
That's an excellent point. And it makes me wonder, Menjo, do we have a pandemic response plan? Do we, as a country, do we have incident response scenarios that allow us to go and coordinate with other countries to forestall, things like the locust invasions that are coming in? And really, if we expand it beyond locusts to the floods and the COVID, do we have a response plan in place, and is it working?
thank you, Daktari. I think Dr. Njenga has really elaborated much on the locust aspect. I think the response that has been there by the government is very clear. Incidentally, locust is not is an international issue from our African context, that it's cross-border, and most times it's supposed to be coordinated at regional level, ideally. I think this is one thing that needs to be put in place, because when it started affecting the other countries, there was need for an alert for all the countries, especially if we were to go the IGAD way. We would look at it from the IGAD angle and say, can we have a pandemic plan at that level? Because for locust, that was totally beyond. It's still the same again with the COVID, because for the COVID now, by the time it went pandemic, it was endemic before it went pandemic. And when WHO declared that, yes, we have a pandemic which has crossed all the borders to all the existing countries now, that coordination and what happens seems to have caught everybody off guard. I want to say that, especially that this is a new microorganism that has everybody is learning, and that is why the responses are very, very varied. But then there are those emergency responses that are inbuilt within each country on how to react in certain catastrophes or in certain situations that can affect the whole population of the country. And I think as a country, the response in terms of health was very good, and seems to be working, as much as we have a few challenges here and there. But again, you can see the challenges that is coming, especially in relation with the neighbors. But in relation to food security, incidentally, the government had also put in place a pandemic response on food security. And basically, it started with the data issue. The government has been trying to collect data across the counties at the market level to survey the situation of availability of certain food products, the mainstay of food products in the market. And so far, I think the close to that 7 counties that have sent in market data information to show what's the status. And so far, we seem to be having we still have good supply at the market level of the main products. The one that's a bit challenged is the wheat. But maize, rice, sorghum, millet, beans, and potatoes.
Are you saying that data on markets has been collected once the market's closed, or that information is still available? We'll move forward to Moses, and then we'll double back to you. Let's just Moses. It feels like we are in biblical times right now, right? We're talking about locusts, we are talking about floods, talking about infectious diseases, and even sometime we heard about this narrow bee fly in Narok. Those gnats in the Bible, you saw those things, and we're feeling like wave after wave after wave of things. What is happening? Is this a coincidence? What is happening?
Well, it's a fair question. Since my name is Moses, I'll respond. From the day.
Yes, very
from the days of Moses, there were floods, there were droughts, there were locusts as well. So in many ways, the world has changed, perhaps with more frequency of those happenings. Climate change is with us, global warming is with us, rising sea levels. So really, a lot of these things have been anticipated with increasing risks. So in many ways, we should expect more of this. The question always is an issue of scale, because again, if we are talking coronaviruses, we have had a number of them. So this time round, of course, the issue is scale. The coronavirus, of course, when we look at issues of, in addition to climate change, we are looking at matters of globalization. The first major pandemic in 1918 came about because of the war. Many people are coming from, converging in various parts of the world. And when they got back home, they brought diseases and whatnot. So really, that was the beginning of globalization, if I were to say so, and you can see the impact of that. But with increased international travel, international trade, linking countries that have never linked before, we should expect more of this pandemics. So in a way, we could say we are living in biblical times. But again, I would say we've always done that all the years. In terms of locusts, I think a lot has been mentioned. Dr. Njenga has spoken about it. Menjo has also spoken about it. So, it's a regional issue. In addition to what has been said, I think we also have a lot of ungovernable spaces. Somalia and parts of northern Kenya and parts of southern Ethiopia. So those spaces, when it comes to locusts, again, you find when there is that infestation, it was very difficult to control them. Up to now, I think it's the first time we are having, for example, aerial spraying in Somalia. So a lot of those things really conspired to make this even more difficult. In addition to the weather pattern, I'm sure we are aware of this, dipole situation, where you have this warm waters on the Indian Ocean that has created so much rain around the region that has made the locusts not leave. Also the wind patterns, the expectation was that at some point the winds would go north and therefore we would not have any more locusts within Kenya. So all these things have conspired to make it even more challenging. So, perhaps we expected Kenya to be prepared, but again, knowing that the last major infestation happened 70 years ago, a lot of the preparedness was not adequate. So of course we had to depend on international community. So I think that's really a lesson in terms of if you're really to be prepared, you have to test your preparedness over and over. So that's what I would say. So it's perhaps a coincidence, but again, these are the signs of the times. So that's what I would say for now.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you saying is that a set of things have conspired to happen, not by design, but by chance. Several things have come to happen at the same time, but it looks like we're going to be seeing more of this because of things like climate change and globalization. So, Mr. Kirwa, it looks like we have a new normal, right? There are some key drivers which are making these events happen in a more frequent way. What should we expect? Is this a new normal?
Yeah, thank you. I wouldn't say this is a new normal, but it gives us an opportunity to rethink the way we do things. It will give us an opportunity to rethink even the way we do our planning systems, our businesses, and our strategies, not just only at the individual level or business level, but even at the national level. When you look at the national plan, especially for Kenya and SDGs, the things that we are planned to do as an economy, the country has said we need to move this direction in terms of ensuring we have food security, we have self-sustaining in food, and that kind of thing. it gives us an opportunity to rethink the strategies we have put in place, because sometimes some of these strategies do not take into consideration the happenings of the things that probably are playing at the background. They may not look major until they come. An example of this is the locust. We know they are locusts. We know they operate, and I had a map here that FAO have taken note that generally locusts are operating from Ethiopia, Somalia, going up to the north and Mauritania area. And yet, occasionally they would move, and when swarms are coming, we see them coming. I saw somebody has made a comment in the chat to say that FAO or the UN as a all desert locust system and approach to desert locust. Yes, we have that, but it is for individual countries to actually prepare themselves. And as Dr. Njenga said, Kenya, much as it was not ready for this, to quickly prepare, but of course you saw that the desert locust arm of the UN was able to support this country in terms of securing some of the things for controlling. But what does that mean to us? It means the things that we know, sometimes we don't prepare for them. So that when it comes, we feel like it's almost like a calamity, something we were not prepared, a pandemic, for example. But what it means is we should move to another level where we are feeling that the country is well prepared to face some of these challenges. The country is well prepared to face some of the happenings that happen either by climatic change. We know, for example, with globalization and climatic change, there is a wave. The way the currents are moving in the oceans and all that is bringing a new wave. Nobody would have expected, for example, would have so much rain, especially in places like even Nairobi at this particular time. But you can see that has happened because of the waves that is happening. Luckily, we have the weather forecast, which keeps on advising us that this is likely to happen. But probably it is time that we take into consideration the forecast mechanism that is we have in our country, and if there is need to equip it more, to be prepared for such things so that we can be able to say, yes, this is happening. For example, nobody should really be dying of floods. If we know floods are coming in this country, rains, every rains are coming, certain precautionary measures need to be taken into consideration. So it's forcing us to rethink our strategies, our way of doing things, and of course, added to the COVID that has come in that was not expected. COVID has sort of made us even move to what we are doing now, online. We probably then create a situation where the new normal may not necessarily be face-to-face meetings, but a situation where ideas are exchanged, knowledge is passed on, seminars are held even in a situation like this. So I see going forward, this whole situation has created a situation whereby we need to rethink the way we operate, not just as organizations, but even as a government. As a government of Kenya needs to rethink, how do we then approach some of these issues? But because these things that are happening are not all of a sudden happening to us, but we expected them to happen, but continuously we are not preparing. Maybe as I sign off, there's something that is beginning to cause a situation now. What happens if borders are closed? You know, the situation we have between Kenya and Tanzania. So this is going to create a situation where we're saying, should countries therefore be self-sufficient in the most crucial food items, the thing that we actually call food, essential food items, essential food crops. So it may make our country to rethink its food reserve, its food balance sheet. How do you manage your food balance sheet? What fraction of your food balance sheet do we then need to get from outside importation? What portion of the food balance sheet do we need to grow internally within our country? So that in situations like that, first of all, nations should look at self-sufficiency. And if that is the case, how then do we ensure we have efficiency in the production systems?
Thank you, William. So it looks like there is no lack of strategies. Some of these things, we have people who are looking out to them. But then the question begs, given some of the responses we've seen, right? Are the responses or implementation of the strategies we have commensurate or proportionate with the problem? Especially if you're looking at this COVID thing and the way the government has responded to it, are we killing a fly with a sledgehammer? Especially if you look at the realities, right, of African governments, of the Kenyan government, of the economic situation of most Kenyans. David, are we responding too heavily in a way that is actually hurting our own people?
Thanks, Dr. Mujibi, for the question. I think, yeah, here we have experts in health who have given very clear messages about how we can easily reduce the exposure of our people to COVID-19 because of the effect it would have on people's health and mortality and so on. But that's a message from the health experts. But then the authorities need to also see this as an interconnected system, because health does not stand on its own. People are healthy because they eat. And if they don't eat, they're unhealthy, they don't work, they can't feed themselves. So we have to see this as a system. So while I agree that we have done very well at the front line, I think that we haven't done very well in terms of dealing with the effects of the messages that we are giving people. Let me give an example of a snake bite. Not a very nice experience, but for people who have, when you have a snake bite, you don't go to hospital for the doctor to deal with that bite where the cut is, where the actual physical bite is. It's actually quite easy. Perhaps it's just a stitch or two, and the skin is formed again, and you can go back to work. But the reason why people rush to the hospital is because of the effect of what went in through that bite, because it is going to affect every system of the body, and that is what is causing, that is the poison that will kill you. So eventually when you die, unfortunately, you don't die because of that 1 centimeter exposure of the skin, what we call the wound, but you die because of what came in and how many parts it was able to spread to, and you become weak and die. So in that case, I think that the current response that we are having, we have been watching the wound for too long. We have not been thinking about what other systems are getting affected by the messages we are giving. So how do we maintain the message of stay home while we still ensure that if it's still a planting season, it's raining, there are people who are still planting now, that people can still plant. Nobody can make a quick decision about using machines if they didn't have them in January or February. So they are still using tens of people to go and plant manually on the land. And if you come there as a health expert, you'll be very surprised that these people are too close to each other because you're planting rows of maize that are 60 centimeters apart, and that is too close for the sake of COVID. So I think I would not say that we are not responding well, but I think we have failed for this particular pandemic. I think we have been caught off guard, and the only thing we are left with is perhaps now to pray that the effects do not become far-reaching. That's the only, perhaps the only way we can do it. But in terms of how prepared we were and how we have responded, I think the only takeaway from this pandemic would be we get a solution quickly, and then we learn from it, hoping that we can prepare better, not necessarily for a pandemic, but for any disaster that comes to affect systems, the way COVID-19 is actually threatening to affect the systems. In that case, I mean that we are succeeding on one front and failing on the most important part of it. And I think later on, we are going to be discussing, Dr. Mujibi, when did we know that COVID-19 was going to reach Kenya? When was it first mentioned? Did you hear any programs in January, in December saying that in the event that COVID-19 comes to us, this is how prepared we were? So this cannot be a short-term preparation. If we didn't prepare some years ago about disasters, and I say disasters because I do not want to imagine that our thinking of disasters can only be confined to pandemic. It can be any other thing, even what Dr. Kira is talking about, the closure of borders. That in itself, someone needs to be thinking now. How shall we respond to the shortage of the supplies that we get to support our industries so that we can be able to take away, to export the goods that we make from these raw materials? So every small disaster, somebody has to be able to think, what magnitude do we expect that this will affect our economy as a whole? And therefore, what is the little thing we can be doing? But then I mean, a majority of us are Kenyans, and we can already think that this was not going to be a short-term preparation, and perhaps we can only have a chance to learn from it, and then think, what do we do in case something like this happens? Dr. Mujibi, when you are a hunter and you've gone to the wild, you do not begin to think when a lion is 2 meters away from pouncing on your back. That is a long time to think. You have to have thought from at home, which tool do I carry? Because there are likely to be lions in the forest. And if it comes, what am I going to do? But the moment it is now 2 centimeters, you do not even have the combination of the brains that are required to think about how to escape danger. So I think that's where we are. We are 2 meters away from the pouncing by a predator, and we can only escape miraculously, but not because we prepared. So yeah, that would be my opinion about our response with regard to the economic situation of Africa.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David. I think the sum total is we saw some things, we didn't plan for them, and as a consequence, we were not ready to respond appropriately. I just want to give one minute or so back to Menjo so that he can finish his point. But Menjo, as you finish your point about what are our learning systems, because this is about ability to learn and ability to implement. You were talking earlier about the government collecting information about the food situation in the country, and we've done something like 37 counties already. Maybe as you finish that point, can you please also elaborate about the government's learning mechanisms and how those learnings are actually put into practice?
I think earlier on, I was just trying to illustrate, Dr. Mujibi, that the first step in reaction to this pandemic, of course, is to monitor the availability of food items in the market and to the population. And as I was saying, the government has put a lot of effort to ensure that is ongoing. And so far, there's data coming from about 7 counties to monitor 3 things: availability, and then number 2, the situation of the pricing, and then access to market. And this is helping the government to make decisions on how to support each county and how to support each population on the issue of food security. And on that note, based on the same data, it's also going to help us or help the government to predict how long will be food secure. I think you've been seeing in the papers that we've been trying to work on some import, especially on the maize, about 4 million bags that are going to come in to support, to ensure that we have adequate up to the month of June. So these are immediate reactions that the government are putting in on issues of food security to ensure that. And then, of course, for those who are lacking livelihoods because of loss of jobs and things like that, I think you realize the government is putting in place some payments, monthly payments, weekly payments to support those people to access, because it's not just availability, it's also the issue of access. So on that note, the government has a response, a pandemic response strategy that has been developed and is being run by the Ministry of Agriculture. I'll respond on that first issue in that format. You are asking something else in the second format, Dr. Mujibi.
Yeah, so we were talking about, I think we have the strategy that are developed. There are people who are watching things that are unfolding. Like you've said, there's data that is being collected. How do we take these learnings and use them to prepare better next time? Because clearly a lot of these 3 things have found us flat-footed. We want to respond better. How do we, institutionalize these learnings? Because I think that is our weakest point. And anybody else can also comment as Menjo continues.
Yeah, I think one area that we've not been very strong is on data, having access and
Dr. Njenga, I saw you wanting to say something.
one of the areas we've been weak has been on issues of data. And I think it has been a big challenge. Agriculture.
No, Manjo, continue.
Can I continue?
Yes.
Okay. So I was saying one of the areas that we've been very weak on has been on data. And you see, without data, you cannot plan. And without plan, of course, you cannot have food security. So I think one of the key lessons that I think the government has gotten on this is to emphasize data, and mainly county-based data on all agriculture items, to ensure that we know what we have, we know what our deficits are or our excesses are, and then we can plan on market. So that one has been key. Number two is the modeling, because scenarios, creating scenarios has been also one of our weak points, and it's still linked to data issues. Because if you don't have good data, then modeling becomes a challenge. And you know, prediction is more about modeling, and modeling scenarios, various scenarios that we've seen, even including the ones that we have. And modeling will now bring in experts in that field of modeling to be able to now help us generate strategies as per each scenario. And I think that is a lesson that we've learned, and I think the government has learned and is going to emphasize on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. In the interest of time, because I can see we are slightly behind time, I just want to bring in one or two questions from participants before we go to part two of the discussion. Now, somebody asked, we had the UN body, which Kirwa has responded to, but in its strategies, has the government tried to use biological control, things like gut bacteria, lupin seed oil, to try and control the locust? If anybody has some insight to that, please share with us.
Are you talking about having enough data by the government and the capacity to control locusts?
So I think the question that somebody has posed here is that there are biologicals out there, because I think one of the challenges the government has been having is to get the appropriate pesticide to use in the control of the locusts. So somebody has said there are biological agents out there. Have they been tried?
Now, in fact, talking about that, I think it's better that we look at things from a summary perspective. So you have Eric talking about the Desert Control Office at Wilson, which was probably set there in the 70s. There is a person talking about, now I'm discussing the locusts. I'm not going to discuss food security yet. There are those people who are wondering, from what you have said, do we have biological and other technical systems? I think that question came from Lois Wanjenya and Ulefon. I don't know who Ulefon is. And then there is Eric Yegon, the prediction. Susan asked about the planning, which seems to be the weakness. Goni Mwasaru is talking about geospatial data and information for floods control, or I presume that is the only answer to his question. And of course, Dorothy is talking about food security. So let us look at the three things that are fundamental when we face any aspect of governance. The first thing is effective governance. The second thing is effective communication and mobilization of the support system and the people necessary for it. And the third one is usually adequate resources to manage the crisis. Well, those are the three things that any leader must always look at from the word go. Now, if I am to look at effective government, we have had locusts. Some of you are young, but some of us were there still, at least thinking well in the 70s, when we had large locust invasions that were not controlled. They say that this locust control menace that locust invasion this year is 70 years, the last one was 70 years ago, which is ridiculous. All right. I think sometimes we expand information and data to suit the needs of acquiring resources, which we neither put into the effective use of supporting the crisis. But let me keep quiet. Now, the second problem about effective governance, because you see clearly, we know, if there is a Kenyan who doesn't know about locusts, you tell me, at least those who manage and govern, we know. And we have had it all these years, 70 years. So we know. But why is government not effective in controlling it? That's a question I've asked myself very seriously, very many times. Why is our Ministry of Agriculture involved in so many crises? The crisis of the blue ocean economy, the crisis of importation of sugar, the crisis of importation of maize, the crisis of our inability to know what exactly to do or where to get the finances for locust control. Agriculture and worms. Before the locusts, we had the worms, if you remember very clearly. Yeah? Became dual. We have the inability to come up with a technical solution for floods. All right. So what is the problem with effective government? That it is not effective.
I think, Dr. Mujibi, if I could say something about... Sorry, Dr. Jenga, you finished?
No, he's still going on.
I wanted to summarize one little thing. The effective communication of the problem. If you communicated very well in December, and the communication was, why don't we harness, like, who is this who said it? I think it was Sophie Masharia. Sophie Masharia put a very simple question there. She says, look, gentlemen, ladies, if we had a forecast of locusts, why don't we get a harnessing system for locusts and either turn them into food, protein for animals, or eat them as in Western Kenya they did. They swiped all of them in Western Kenya apparently, and in Kisumu, they ate them up. And if they went to Uganda, the Ugandans ate all of them. I think you know senene is one of the best delicious foods in Uganda, okay? Yeah. So locusts can be eaten and they're very delicious. We could have harnessed them.
A different species.
No, don't be cheated.
Go ahead.
They only looked a little bit more yellow, but they're edible. In fact, people were eating them in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, they were selling them in kilograms. Okay, so what about adequate resources? We are broke, my dear people. So now, the three things that you need to govern properly don't seem to be clearly managed. So I leave it there and tell you, could it be that we don't have intelligent governance? Could it be that we really need to look at all those systems of bureaucracy and mixed infighting and the FF factor, fitina factor, I call it the fitina factor, political intrigues, infighting within government. You know, any house divided against itself cannot stand. Okay, so I think the question of adequate response is a question of governance. And the question of governance is we have a problem in governance. And I think as people of Kenya, and especially the current government, we need to do something about it.
David, before you go, let me allow Moses. He addressed his hands, and then you close for us this section.
Okay.
Moses.
Yeah, I'd raised my hand earlier, but obviously Dr. said quite a bit. I think, added to the issue of governance really is project management and coordination. The challenge with government as it is today, the departments have become so autonomous that they don't work together. So when a situation like this comes, you find then rallying everyone around, one person, forming project teams that are versatile is really a challenge. I think the other thing is really underinvestment in agriculture. Agriculture commands less than 3% of our national budget. So obviously there's nothing left within that budget for things like, a rainy day or emergencies. There's really not much left. So we really need to rededicate, bring in more resources to support agriculture. But again, that means we have to have bankable projects within agriculture that really looks at the situation, assesses it properly, and then be able to forecast the needs of the country. So without serious budgets, I think agriculture will really continue to suffer, and therefore our food security. So I agree that the issue of governance is something we really need to look at in government as a whole, and also bringing in private sector.
Okay, so David finished for us this segment. Very good.
Actually, I was responding to an issue that was read out by Dr. Jenga about Sophie asking why not harvest the locusts and feed to cows or eat them. And I think, I'm not a life scientist myself, but I read and heard life scientists warning that these locusts are not the kind that were born in your farm and grew in your farm. They could have flown from inter-country transits and could have been sprayed with all sorts of lethal chemicals to do away with them. So the warning was, how do we then know what they are carrying across their generations? So then putting those locusts back into the food chain, either by giving, Sophie could actually be thinking about animal-based proteins into animal feed, and of course also nice proteins for people. But I think the idea for this warning was, let's not introduce new pollutants into the supply chain because we have enough. And the biggest of them all is aflatoxin from the maize. So we need to be careful unless we have some labs where every locust you catch can be given a clean bill of health before you fry it.
Thank you very much. Menjo, you are itching. Okay, last one.
Yeah. I was just there was somebody who asked about the use of biological enemies for the locust, that have been put there, or strategies that have been put there. But as I think Moses said, unfortunately, sometimes we still have a lot of silo operation by different, even specialists in their own areas, to not be able to understand the ecological impact of using such a strategy to eradicate locusts. So I think what is lacking is to have a total impact analysis of use of any strategy to eliminate, like what David is saying about using of chemicals. Of course, that also has a lot of other effect on the whole environment. The same goes with the biological means to eradicate locusts. So I think that has not been put together to a level where you can confidently use it and say, okay, if we use this kind of an organism to get rid of locusts, then what is the effect, the long-term effect to everybody?
Mujibi, Daktari.
Yes, sir.
I feel here sometimes we may complicate an issue too much. I've been working with the Ministry of Agriculture under the Deputy President's office. One of the things that we said very clearly was that we have to have a strategy for geospatial data. We got that support. NASA brought in all the information for the last 30 years, if I'm not wrong, not perfect information, but geospatial information about our land, our transport system, our animals, our soil. You can do radiology analytics of our soils. Somebody has said here, we probably have half of the information in our country, but we never share it from one department to another. We are silent. But even if you have all that, right now I can tell you that you can easily get the historical analysis of our geospatial space for rainfall, for animals, for forestry, for food, for wild animals, leave alone the ones that we eat like maize. We can get all that. Now, if you ask me, why haven't we got it? How many people are we going to employ to give us a historical analysis of how over the last 30 years or 50 years, the locusts have gone, or the floods? Or in fact, if you talk to the Maasai, let me put it this way, because I was talking to one the other day. They gave the white man that place called Narok. Why? If you ask them carefully from the ancient traditions, they will tell you, we gave them that piece of land because we knew that is where the floods go. So the European went, the Africans took over Narok. Right now, it is a riverbed, or that is where we get most floods and deaths. So if you ask me, is it that we can't collect data? Data is already collected. Is it that we can't put data together? We don't have good governance. Is it that we are thinking about it? We don't have intelligent governance. All is pointing at a problem of our governance. Otherwise, if you have somebody there to efficiently mobilize, to efficiently govern, to efficiently put the people and communicate the information very well, we would get it. No, we want the problem so that we can ask somebody to bring us $8 million, which we use $2.3 million to do what? To buy 20,000 liters of fuel, 2 aeroplanes, and less than 10,000 liters of insecticide, which you don't even know and you haven't even trusted, all right? And then we ask ourselves at the end of the day, have we solved the problem? And then the government brings us a report. It was meant to have come in 4 weeks ago. Well, we were told at the beginning of May 2nd that the report on the locusts will come after 4 weeks. How? Menjo is there telling us about the effects of locusts in the counties. Do we need magic?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jen. Thank you very much. There's a problem with governance. There's a problem with preparedness. There's a problem in execution of the policies we have that are there. We've got the data, but somehow we are not being able to utilize it in a way that allows us to respond effectively to the pandemic. I want us to go to now more directly and discuss now on the actual impacts that these plagues have had on food security. So earlier we've been talking about the origins and how these things have come to be, but right now, specifically on food, Moses, now we are seeing that global supply chains are really affected, right? For a country like Kenya, which imports a significant amount of food because we are not food sufficient here in Kenya, right? And we've seen already Tanzania blocking their borders, right? Because of our responses to the health issues. What should we expect with regard to food availability and food prices?
Yeah, thank you, Denis, for that question. Obviously, there are a lot of pressures. One, I would say, because of the current rains, because of availability of vegetables, availability of various things that people can consume, there's not too much pressure. I mean, and a lot of these things happened towards the end of last year. For example, our livestock are in good shape because, again, they have enough forage to eat. So in many ways, milk production and other things were up compared to previous years, and we've seen the situation of almost glut in some of those value chains, so to speak. So I would say temporarily the situation is not too bad, but I would say that going forward there's definitely a challenge. The issue of imports, for example, I would say Kenya, again, because of our grain deficit situation, usually we meet our demand by importing from other East African countries, primarily Uganda and Tanzania, with, of course, the lockdown and the challenges we have at the borders, and also the fact that these countries themselves feel threatened in terms of their own food security. We expect the flow of imports to actually reduce. When you look at, for example, Western Kenya, where a lot of food actually comes from Uganda, from eggs to chicken to bananas and whatnot, the prices of food have gone up a little. So I would say that's really an area of challenge. Looking at it, worldwide, for example, the production of grains generally are expected to remain stable, except maybe for rice that is being hoarded a lot of times in Asia and other places. They're keeping rice for themselves. But most of the coarse grains that we use, whether we are talking maize, barley, and other things, the supply is likely to be stable. And of course, the prices have gone a little down, but a lot of this is because of the global logistics and challenges. Also, of course, also trade between the US and China is also affecting food situation in many of those places. So, but going forward, we, our country will experience deficit. One, because again, within this season that we're looking at, because of the pandemic, because again of last year's flooding and too much rains, especially in the grain belt, you find then the transition between last year's season and this year's season has not been very good. We didn't have enough dry season in between to enable people to really cultivate properly. So again, because of that blood situation, because again of the investment climate generally with the pandemic, and also because of reduced government budget, because again, this year I've not had one government buying maize, for example, from farmers, or government providing subsidies for fertilizer and many other things. So a lot of those things have also dampened what we call investor sentiment. I also expect that because quite a bit of farming is also done by what we call telephone farmers who are Nairobians. I expect again, because they're locked in Nairobi, they're not seeing the situation on the ground, there can be a challenge. There's also the challenge of the flow of inputs, whether some of them are imported, some locally because of lockdown. So I expect a bit of these things to really affect how much we've cultivated in terms of land, in terms of acreage, how much inputs we put on the ground. So I expect perhaps the harvest to be a little lower. But having said that, the rains are a little higher, so there could be some trade-offs between, how much input, how much rain. So perhaps the production situation won't be too bad. But again, I'm yet to see the actual assessment.
Thank you, Moses.
Yes.
Thank you. We are going to make it a little bit tight because of the time. We will have to stick to some 3 minutes. 3 minutes of talk time. We'll have to keep it short to 3 minutes so that we are within time. But what I hear Moses saying is that the outlook right now is that there is no scarcity. It looks good. But taking into account the fact that the floods and all the rains have washed a lot of fertilizer and grain for the farmers, most of our food is produced by smallholder farmers. We are seeing that what they had planted now is being washed out. But we're also seeing that the second wave of the locusts is going to coincide with when the food is just about to get to the level to maturity. So in fact, there could be a problem. Menjo, as you're collecting data out there, what are you seeing in terms of risk of food scarcity?
Thank you, Daktari. I think I totally agree that we'll have an issue on food scarcity. That one, there's no question about it. On the three factors that have affected food productivity, starting with the locust. Fortunately, the locust came in when most people are doing the harvest, so didn't affect the last season productivity. But this time, especially if the second wave comes now when we are having young crops, we might have, especially if it hits the region that is the food basket of this country. So that one is an issue. We also have an issue that this time planting took place when we already had COVID. The whole issue of access to input might have been an issue. And also access to the people who work in the farm. You remember with this issue of distancing and the whole issue of trying to control COVID, we definitely are going to have an issue in terms of productivity. We also have an issue in terms of productivity because of the current rains. We're having above normal rains, and these ones are definitely going to affect the way we produce. And the fact that we didn't have a break between the two seasons, I don't think we did enough tillage. We didn't do the right type of, so best practice was not done. And I also think that the smallholder farmers were not supported well in extension activities because there was so much concentration on this COVID thing. So the farmer literally has been on his own. So there's likelihood that the acreage under production has reduced on the main food items. And that will definitely affect our ability to feed the population. But on the other end, at the market end, we're also having this other challenge because close to 90% of the market is controlled by traders, by smallholder or retailers. And since markets were closed, definitely access to market has been an issue. And the issue of curfew, where movement of products from farm to the market has also been greatly affected. And this is affecting livelihoods for the smallholder farmers because one, if they don't have a market, then they can't sell, they don't have money, then that an effect, a negative or a positive feedback effect on the livelihood of the farmer. So therefore, I think we need, as we collect data, we really need to collect data to find out that what we really have. What is the deficit, considering per capita consumption on each of the food items, and then plan well in terms of where do we get the balance in advance. I think that's the direction now that we need to head.
Thank you. It looks like our supply chains definitely are very informal, right? Like you've said, rightly said, curtailing movement of people actually curtails the movement of food, right? Because our supply chain is informal.
Mujibi,
yes.
Daktari, I am doubtful of some of those facts you're presenting. 70% of our people are subsistence. Okay. If you tell them today that there is no food in Nairobi, they go back to their plots of land. And let me tell you something, they have enough to eat. Because you don't have one product like maize to eat alone. You can have cassava, you can have yam, you can have, which are good with the rains. So I don't think we need too much data from that perspective. Let me put it that way. Am I speaking to you? But what worries me is the following. You say Tanzania. Tanzania has an issue, and that is we are lucky as Kenyan farmers that the Tanzania border is closed. Why? Because every restaurant in Nairobi and most of the towns from Eldoret, they get the cheaper food from Tanzania, Malawi, and Uganda, and Sudan. So what happens to the farmer here? The farmer here in Kenya, because of lack of proper policies and lack of thinking of tax systems and lack of thinking of how we are going to assist the farmer, they normally have a higher price. So people don't go for tomatoes to our farmers here in Kenya, very few. Most of the people go to Tanzania, go to Uganda. You go to all the restaurants on Moi Avenue and ask them where they get the food. If you have done that research, you know very clearly they come from Tanzania. Okay. So closing Tanzania border means that the Kenyan food resources of tomatoes, capsicum, carrots, and all that sort of thing is going to go to the market, but at a higher price than normal. Okay. That's the reality of the situation. And therefore, even though we feel that we have closed the Tanzanian border and therefore we'll have less food, no, we will not have less food. What we will have is a price hike in the food that we buy. And if I am not wrong, if you look at your inflation rate right now, link it to the maize, and you'll find that your inflation rate right now of food is higher than normal in the last 1 month. And that is the reason, because now we are consuming from our own farmers. The other thing that you have to keep in mind is, and I agree with Menjo, it is good to get those statistics, and it is good to analyze how much maize you're going to produce, and it is good to foresee possible problems because of floods. But my friend, were you not there last year when our own food maize was destroyed in order to bring maize and sugar and rice from abroad? We import wheat from Russia to go and export it to Rwanda. Okay, people, I don't know. The thing is that at this level of discussion, what you get, Mujibi, is that we don't have a plan for our agriculture. We don't have a plan for our blue economy. We don't have a plan for our dairy. We don't have a plan for planting trees that can be used for agriculture. We don't have a plan for tea. We don't have a plan for coffee. We don't have a plan for flowers. Isn't it? Between us, flowers is 70% of the agricultural exports of the land, floriculture. Now with COVID, it is a problem. So 50% of the flowers of this country, which contribute to your income in Kenya, 50. Now we are operating at 30 to 40% of our floriculture. Okay, so agriculture is a wide element here. And if we have to analyze that statistic of agriculture in this country, and which together with services support 75% of the economy of this country and the employment of this country. So agriculture and services take 75% of the economy. Somebody is not thinking. Let me keep quiet.
Daktari, I totally agree with Dr. Njenga. Of course, there are issues of governance at all levels. We are not saying at which level. It goes all the way to the county level. But I think we've not also packaged our agriculture value chains well to get that kind of support. If you look at the strategies that we have, are basically more of narrative with very little numbers to drive us on. If we can package our agriculture value chains, and let's not generalize because we have a lot of very general strategies lying all over. But we don't have, like, for example, tea. We don't have a specific national strategy for tea value chain. We are relying on private sector and things like that. We don't. So there are a number of strategies, yes, we have. They are narrative based, but we need to go into numbers. So we can say consumption.
So David.
Yes.
Menjo is talking about numbers, right?
Yes.
He's talking about numbers. But where is these numbers? Where is the evidence? Because I think one of the problems we have is we said rightly that we collect data, but I think utilization of that data, putting it into a format that is actually consumable so that it allows us to go to evidence-based responses and actions is actually a problem. Is this data accessible? Is it available? Or it's only in certain offices where it is not then generally consumed by the people who need it to make decisions?
One of the reasons why I would not put Dominic Menjo on defense is because I know that he's doing something about data right now in his current capacity. Yes. So I think Dominic then is safe in my remarks for the issue of data. But I must say, and I think other speakers on the panel have alluded to that, we have a serious weakness in terms of a strategy, not because the strategy is bad, but it is not founded on any data. In fact, a few years ago when I worked for SNV in the dairy sector, there was a push to talk to the dairy boards so that we could be able to quantify the amount of milk that we have in Kenya in a year. There were doubts whether the numbers that we report are actually true. Do we actually have 5.2 billion liters of milk in a year? Nobody wants to come out in the open and say, yes, it is 5 billion. So if we do not know how much milk, do we know how many cows? Do we know how many poor people we have? And do we know how many vulnerable people we have? How well are we integrating data? For example, taking the advantage of devolution, if we just take one county and you say that let's even move away from a pandemic that affects humans and talk about a pandemic, if it is also referred to as that affects a livelihood like dairy. So do we know how many cows we have or how many cows would be affected? is there any possibility that we have a county balance sheet or a country balance sheet in terms of how many livestock resources we have? So there are so many questions to ask, and that's why I think our response is not based on any evidence. What we do, we are basically slashing a field of tall grass, and because we know you just take a slasher and just know this needs to be cut, let's cut it off. But we do not know what's in it. How does it? We have not profiled to know who is where and how are they looking like and how do we respond. So our response, even to the disasters right now, it is not based on any evidence, and that's why then our strategies and our responses look a bit uncoordinated because we don't know where to start. I saw the government the other day when the government was talking about cash transfers, which is a very beautiful social protection measure. I imagine, for example, cash transfers to the old people, to the vulnerable, or even school feeding to the areas which have drought. Those are very beautiful social protection strategies for countries that are still emerging from a traditional economy. But then they were not, the next day you'd hear people say, I am poor, I don't even have food, I'm boiling stones, and I have not received the money. So what does that tell you? If the cash transfers are indeed being done, and I believe they are doing them, but were we able to know who actually deserves? I think also there was some social media, I don't know how true that one is, of someone saying that I earn 150,000 shillings and I have received a cash transfer from the government as a poor person. So perhaps it was serious, maybe it wasn't. But the question that comes is really, what kind of data do we have? And I think we have data as far as demographics are concerned. I see every 10 years we do some sort of census. We get some good for the sake of planning, and I think the Ministry of Planning, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, and other departments are able to use that data. But the question is, the little we have, and I think we under datalized, if there's such a term, we have perhaps less than 10% of what we need. But even that 10% that we have, how do we manage it? How do we use it? Dr. Mujibi, you look at the high political seasons. When the political times are near, like a referendum is near, or even a general election, I see people literally counting people and saying that in Eastern I have this number, in Western I have this number. You can see very good graphs coming up, and someone can actually be able to say there will be a tyranny because of these numbers. They have really done the statistics. So actually, if we wanted, we would actually have those numbers. But I also have my doubts on when we have them, and the little we have, how do we use them? So we have a major issue as far as data is concerned, and that is why we are not also able to procure on time. We have gaps sometimes. Other times we have a surplus. We don't know whether we should open doors for imports of new products because you're not sure whether we are going to have. When you have data, I think Major has mentioned that, and I'm happy that Major is doing. You are scratching the surface, which is very nice. And I like it when somebody says, I found this place, there was a bit of mess as far as data is concerned. I now have a platform to do it, and I'm doing it county by county, and we are making progress. So if Dr. Mujibi, you asking me about the current situation, we are not doing any strategies based on any data-based evidence. We are clearing a bush, and I think we can only use a slasher. And once the grass is cut, we will have cut all other plants that were in that pasture because we didn't profile the pasture in the first place.
Yeah, so it was Kofi Annan who said, if you can't see it, then you can't solve it. So literally we are flying blind. So we have some data, we've not put it into a format, and it's being used somewhere. We've not put it in a format which we can derive maximum benefit for it. So in fact, it is actually possible that given the closure of borders, other countries are closing in and safeguarding their own food security, there possibly will be higher food prices because then we'll be consuming Kenyan food. So higher food prices. Mr. Kirwa, do you see these higher food prices leading to food riots? Because food riots have happened because of prices. Riots and social unrest has happened in other countries because of high prices. People have lost jobs, so the income, capability to earn an income has gone down, and the prices of food is going to go up, presumably. What is going to happen?
Thank you. That's a very interesting point of view to look at a food crisis in terms of saying we have food shortage. I think Dr. Ndenga alluded to something, that we have food. We actually have a lot of food in our country in terms of what can be consumed. We just need to walk to a place like Wakulima Market and you see the wastage. Probably what we need to do is, how do we ensure that there is no wastage, there is minimum wastage in terms of the food that we have. The other thing is, how do we then allow the market to work on the value chains? What I'm saying is that unless we focus on the value chains to see how is this movement of food, are we saying, for example, there is no maize in this country, but when you look at the farmers of the Rift, they are complaining about no market. So it is all about the information that needs to be available, so that once the information is available, where is this food, where can it be found? Counties like Uasin Gishu and Trans Nzoia are complaining and saying, we have so much stocks of maize, why is the government importing? So it's basically to ensure that, yes, is there a mechanism that then supports the pricing of some of these food items? And therefore, what do the counties need to do? What do the government need to do? The national government, ensure that there is a flow of this food. How is this food moving from point A to point B? Now, in terms of this implementation of strategies that we are saying the government, I think it's also time, probably players here, most of them here, in this webinar, are from the private sector. It's time to begin to look at what would be the role of the private sector. Would we be sitting back and saying, oh, the government must do this, oh, the government must do this, and forever this becomes our song and not doing something about it? Probably a number of you have heard, for example, I have been involved in the formation of an umbrella body for agriculture, which we call ASNET, Agricultural Sector Network. Some of you may have heard about it. But we are saying within the agricultural sector network, we need to have a leverage with the government to be able to discuss issues that can drive the role of the private sector in the economy. And I can report to you today that we have had several sessions, we've had several meetings, we've had a document that is coming out where the Ministry of Agriculture has formed several technical committees with the private sector, where we are saying we have the private sector, we have the donor agencies, and we have the government. Because we felt the only way we can make this rolling is not for the private sector to sit back and say the government has budgeted 3.6% of the national budget for agriculture, yet they signed the Malabo protocol of saying we need 10%. So basically, it is the private sector that must rise to the occasion, if you ask me, in terms of making some of these things to move. How are we engaging with the government? How are we engaging with the county government? Because the information that is available, some of these documents that are not being implemented, is because sometimes the designers of this document, the government are designing this document, beautiful documents, but the implementation of it needs to be visited, the implementation of it needs to be monitored. So I think the role of the institutions like the academic institutions, the private sector players like most of the panelists here need to come up and say, yes, this is what the government needs to do, and this is our role in this process. Because when you talk about the information system, whose role should be to provide the information system? Because it's a business something. I know at Strathmore, we are trying to work on having the data analytics to ensure we have all that information. But I can assure you, the government has to provide the background information from the countries. I see Dr. Njenga is smiling.
just hold on, Dr. Njenga, hold on. Yeah, you're gonna come in. Hold on.
Yeah, Dr. Mujibi, I think I need a minute to say something about something that Dr. Njenga has said, and also Kiro has also mentioned about the beauty of the border closing. And before we run away with that excitement, we have data people here, consultants, who will tell you that in as much as we might be happy that now you can now buy the onions from Loitoktok, from Meru, and from other places, and we don't have to receive the onions from Kilomero Market, Narusha, or other places. How about the ingredients of the animal feeds that we make in Kenya? Where do we get the raw materials? So I don't know whether that has been put into consideration. I don't know whether any one of us in the panel could tell us where we produce cotton seed cake, where we produce sunflower seed cake, which are heavily used in our feed mills. And I think the closure of the border will have to now get us thinking. If this was to continue for a few months, and if Uganda was to say we have better things to do with our cotton seed cakes and sunflower, would we still have the animal feed sector? And if we don't have, then how would we make a cow, a Frisian pedigree, produce 20 liters instead of 10 if it is not going to have dairy milk, because you don't have the critical elements of making that dairy milk? So perhaps you might be excited about the commodities as far as the human food is concerned, but I think we have a disaster on the part of animals. Thank you, Dr. Mujibi.
Yeah, I want to interject.
Just hold on, Kirwa.
On what?
Hold on, Kirwa. Hold on. This takes us very, very well into mitigation action. So we've seen what the effects are, and some of them, like David rightly put it, as much as we're saying we can start consuming our own products from this country, some of those are longer term or medium term things to do on the immediate terms. Yeah. In terms of looking at food security immediately, food access immediately, based on what is happening right now, not 6 months, 8 months, or 12 months from now. What can we actually do to actually address all aspects of food security in terms of availability, access, utilization, stability, nutritive value? Menjo, I want to give you first chance to speak. I know the other people want to chime in. I know Kirwa was beginning to speak, but Menjo, go first on how do we secure food security in the medium term and in the long term.
Thank you, Dr. I think basically we on the issue of access to food, that is very, very critical. Access to food and livelihoods for the smallholder farmers. The first thing, of course, is we have to work to live with the COVID. We have to find a way of living with the COVID. And one way of doing that is finding a way of opening markets, especially the informal markets, while introducing the safety measures against the COVID issue. I think that one is very critical. And of course, the issue of curfew and the inter-county movement, that again is going to affect both the production end and the market end. And I think those are within our means. I know it's a challenge because we are trying to avoid a situation where we have a crowd in a place and the infection will go up again. But I think looking at what the other countries are doing, especially the Western countries, we could have a timetable of how to open the markets, for example, which date, for which number of people, for which products. I think that's critical because 90% of our market is controlled by the informal sector. So that's number one. That's number one in terms of, but moving forward in terms of the future, and especially on food security, then we have to start looking at issues like avoiding rain-fed agriculture. Because I think the bigger issue we have in nationality, everybody is saying there's a lot of feed, but if you calculate the per capita requirement by each of our population against our production, most of our food items are in negative. That's a fact. They are in negative. But the issue is like milk. We have 4 months of a lot of milk.
Menjo, you're breaking a lot.
And then we have 8 months of lack of milk. And that is the time when we open our market. So with the hello, you can hear me?
Yeah, your connection is
okay.
Not very good.
I was saying the whole issue of seasonality, which is based on rain-fed agriculture, is one area that we really need to concentrate on as a country to reduce the issue of seasonality and spread the production and assure productivity. And I'm happy the government has come in the aspect of dams with all the challenges that are coming with that, but I think that is the future. The issue of modern varieties that are going to make sure that we're getting more production per plant or per animal or per, so that the issue of technology, okay, that one is also very critical to ensure that
I'll have to let you go because your connection is not very clear. We are not hearing you.
Okay, I'll come back later. Thank you.
Moses, I think agriculture is a devolved function, right? And these challenges that we are having, we are not seeing counties rising up to the challenge, right? The counties are not taking their rightful position to do what they need to do to actually make sure that your food is secure, right? Where is the disconnect with the counties?
Well, good question, Dennis. First and foremost, agriculture is about 34% of our economy. Almost 70% of our export, 60% of our export is agriculture. 45% of government revenue is agriculture. Now, agriculture is devolved to counties that receive about between 10 and 15% of national budget. So obviously, 15%, and if they were to allocate, the 10% that's required for agriculture to really happen, you find it would be a challenge because again, they have, huge, complements in terms of people, salaries, and other things to pay and responsibilities. So I think we've given them a responsibility that is very difficult. We also have 47 counties. Now, in a country that is just 530 square kilometers, you have 47 counties, all of them with governors, all of them. So again, I believe that, the system is such that and each county really is usually under 3,000 square kilometers. So, and our value chains really cross those counties. If we look at dairy, for example, you are talking the whole of, almost 10 counties, almost 18 counties, in different clusters. All the value chains really cross those counties. So again, it becomes very difficult to coordinate. So I think for now, they don't have enough resources to really take care of agriculture. And whether agriculture should have been fully devolved to a point where the responsibility is with them, given the importance of agriculture, especially at this point of our development, I think it's something perhaps we need to rethink. So, but having said that, of course, the counties are organizing themselves into regional economic blocks. They're still very weak. So I don't see them really responding to this challenge as it is. So going forward, obviously, we need to increase the budget that we allocate to counties if we really want them to do this. We need to reorganize our agriculture to industrialize it. For example, forming clusters, creating agro-industrial infrastructure that's required. Remember that most of our agriculture is either grains that is dry. If it's dry, you need silos, you need dryers, you need harvesters, you need quite a bit of things. And you find that because our agriculture is primarily smallholder, a lot of those infrastructure, a lot of those heavy capex that's required for agriculture to really happen cannot happen because of the smallholders. Smallholders, most of them are not bankable. So you find then the amount of money that goes into agriculture is very minimal in terms of loans. So there's a bit of work to be done there in terms of what we call industrial infrastructure. So
thank you, Moses. Thank you, Moses. Sorry to cut you. Just trying to keep it a bit tight. Dr. Njanga, if I come to you, Moses is talking about modernizing our agriculture and reorganizing that agriculture. And we find that one of the biggest hindrances that we get in terms of making sure that food is accessible is that our supply chains are not working very well, right? We need to reorganize those. How do we ensure these supply chains? I know you have said you believe that there's enough food in the country. Others disagree that actually we are very food insufficient. A lot of the materials we use are actually coming from our neighbors. How do we secure the regional trade? Also take advantage of the continental free trade area.
Thank you, Daktari, and I am happy. In fact, I'm getting very beautiful nuggets from everybody, from Menjo, from Kirwa, from Moses, from Duita. Now, sometimes when you sit at the knowledge platform and you're trying to put things together, you realize that you have to integrate a number of things. I'll start by an example so that I can continue to the conclusion in a minute. The example is this. I have an investment group of 5 people. During this COVID-19, I have imported an extracting machine from northern Italy, which was attacked first by COVID, all the way to a factory in the EPZ. I have collected enough avocado. Right now, the avocado destruction in the country is at the level of almost 80 to 85%. Normally, it's 60%. I have the lowest price of avocado I need. Right now, as I am saying, I am commissioning it. I have, of course, when the machine comes to Mombasa, I have to transport it from Mombasa all the way to Athi River. I have done it in exactly 2 days using a very terrible system called the SGR. And it is not terrible because it doesn't transport well. It is terrible because the management and governance of processes and procedures in that place is horrible. We get more money paid to those corrupt little officials than, can you imagine that if you bring something from Mombasa to Nairobi, it takes you 2 weeks to get it out of a cabin of the railway? Okay, anyway, let me keep quiet. In these last 3 weeks, I have been amazed about our capacities here in this country. I've looked at maize, I've looked at beans, I've looked at capsicums, I've looked at tomatoes. Menjo says we don't have that. I say we do, but there must be a truth in both of us. And what is that problem? So my solutions, number 1. In our small scale level, each of our businesses are very small. If we do not form business associations, you will all be speaking like this. We will never have enough capacity to speak to government. Number 2, there are too many government policy makers and implementers who are in the same business, or at least have what we may call internal trading, what do you call it? Insider trading. Somebody here has said, we don't know what milk we are producing in dairy. We know everything. We know everything. In fact, if you want to live here and go and get the data, call a certain gentleman who runs some of the cooperatives of dairies called Eric Boatuti. He is my former student. We know everything. Because we united as dairy producers, we were able to tell the president of this country to stop this business of paying dairy milk liter per liter 17 shillings when they're selling it at 37 to 46 shillings. Of course, through the so-called industrial processes, okay? The cost of producing 1 liter of milk is 23 shillings. Why? Okay, somebody has said about sunflower, I'm not going to speak about it. But the problem was that the cost is 23 and the milk is bought by the dairy keepers. Brookside, you know all of them. There are many. There are many, but the one that comes to our mind is Brookside. Ilara, there is Delamere, there is Kenya Creameries. There are 1,000,001 things, including external ones. But you see here, a certain number of people control the vast majority of that milk. So the small traders of dairies who've never decided to come together are attacked by one big investor and they remain silent. So the first thing we have to do is how can we delink policy makers and implementers of policy from doing the same business? The president has already said it, but I don't think anything is being done with that. And that goes to the politics that Twitter has been talking about. Every time we have politics, we are importing sugar at the lowest price, and it is only a few families doing that. And every time we have problems of maize, it is because some politicians are importing maize. So let's talk about that. We have to speak about the truth. The truth is there. We have enough maize in Kitale. We can get enough maize in Kitale. Let me go ahead. The next thing is remove savings and credit cooperatives from Ministry of Cooperatives and put it under the finance sector. Right now, the Minister of Agriculture, Livestock, dairy keeping, blue economy, and cooperatives. And those cooperatives include SACCOs. The finance minister is trying, Treasury, is trying to control the methodologies of SACCOs, which are really financial institutions. So I think if they are still, and I'm not too sure of this fact, if they are still in cooperatives, SACCOs must be removed from cooperatives, because SACCOs are where we get the investment for the cooperatives or the small business associations of agriculture, and they should be looked as such. Then, finally, and the most important, we don't have aggregators. We don't have aggregators of our food, so a small farmer of 2 acres has to transport their food to the marketplace. And secondly, we don't have an aggregated market system. So the same place you sell milk products is the same place you sell manure, is the same place you sell cows, is the same place you sell goats, is the same place you sell anything that doesn't go with it. So why don't we get African markets aggregated around food crops that are similar, so that if one is not there, the other one is used and we can talk about it. So now aggregators are the ones that help you in supply chain. If you have aggregators in each of the regions and you reduce them to around 8 serious central aggregators, we can have aggregators means food storage, a storage for food, a storage for fish, a storage for grains, a storage for rice, a storage for tomatoes, each with a different angle. If we had aggregators in every part of this country and then united to around 8 aggregators, we can distribute food across, because to connect 8 aggregators is very simple. If we have an aggregator for maize, we can dry maize in the aggregator's place. It makes it easier for us to do things. But we don't have any aggregators. And the government aggregators are corrupt. Now,
thank you, Dr. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those insights. Let me give Kirwa a chance. We've heard about these mitigations. Some of them are midterm, some of them are long-term. It will take us a significant amount of time to see a turnaround. What do you see as some of the immediate actions that will actually rejuvenate our agriculture right now for the farmers who are now scratching their heads because either the floods took away all their fertilizer and seeds, or the locusts are going to come when the crops are just about to flower, the locusts are going to do. What can we do for those farmers so that they are still in business next year?
Good, thank you. I think, first of all, I think the comments that have been raised in this platform has been very good. One is the fact that we need to relook not just at the government, but what we need to do. The issue of aggregators, the issue of, do we realize that we have enough food? But I want to agree with David in the issue of animal feed. A lot of cottonseed cake and all that comes from either Bonda in Tanzania or Nile Industries in Tanzania, Uganda. They are the major suppliers of the raw materials which are critical in our dairy production. What has happened in our country is that over time, we killed our cotton sector. And of course, as you're aware, recently we signed, the government agreed that BT cotton can be grown in our country. Obviously, when that happens, we will be able to get some form of raw materials. But until that happens, we are going to have a crunch in terms of the animal feeds. We have to agree to that. That yes, because we have over-relied on our neighbors to produce some of those things. But that's not a bad thing, because what we were looking at was a global market, a regional market where goods and services could flow. And of course, we have issues of competitive advantage. Those guys in Tanzania producing better than us. Those guys in Uganda being able to produce because of their cheap inputs, they were able to produce and therefore avail at a better price. What we need to look at going forward is how are we then going to take stock of what we have? That is the greatest challenge, getting stock of what we have, so that when somebody says we have so much maize in our country, we actually have that much maize. Because what is happening is, one side of part of our country would say we don't have maize. Some counties will say, no, we have so much maize. So basically, it shows that there's a discrepancy in how this information flows. We probably need to take a stock of what this country can produce. We need to take a stock of what is really what we need to import, and then begin to move. I think despite the COVID and all that, we're still in a global village. We cannot just continue to produce in the most inefficient ways and expect that we will not expect competition from outside. So I think we must prepare ourselves to be efficient in our production, to ensure that whatever happens, we are still as competitive, even at the farm level, we are competitive as a country. We are competitive in our production system. We have looked at the process of our production. We are competitive in how we aggregate what we have produced. Are we having warehouses? Is the warehouse system working? And that's why I'm talking about the private sector coming in to play their role, because government has been very inefficient business person. So to imagine that a government can be a good businessman, to buy maize, to transport maize and all that, would be to say we will continuously continue to rely on the government. So there are certain functions that we must pull the government out, and the private sector must strengthen their muscle to be able to look at what needs to happen. I was looking at the food security report, which has been done by SDG platform, donor platform with the government. And they're saying in the next 10 or so, 5 or so years, we are going to put close to $4.5 billion in the agriculture sector. And out of that $4.5 billion in the agriculture sector, 80% of it is going to come from the private sector. Now the question is, has the private sector organized itself to be able to say, we will take advantage of this, so that the government is pushed in terms of creating facilitation, creating an environment where business can run, where the private sector can play their role, where the private sector can be able to say, we are moving goods, we have these numbers. And then the role of government, yes? Thank you.
We have only 5 minutes. I would like to bring in David to say some last words, and then see if we have any additional questions. Menjo, I can see your hand, but let's bring in David first, and then see a few questions. David.
Thank you, Dr. Mujibi, for the chance. And I think it's good to mention something about, someone asked this statement of what government is doing or not doing might soon fatigue our audiences. While I agree with that, I also think that it's good for us to acknowledge that there are some enablers that are at a macro level. Something like a census or anything that involves collecting and management of data at a national level cannot be initiated and carried out fully by one private sector organ. So you may use private sector as a means to do that, but that vision, the custodian of national data, is actually government. So some of these enablers, private sector can do a lot. We can push government. We can contribute, to funds that are involved to do many methods of collecting this data. But at the end of the day, the government must do it. If you go to some countries that are more developed in terms of agriculture, and you want to invest in a certain corner of that country, you can go to an office and ask, if I want to grow this crop in this zone, what is my expected yield in a year? And that person can be able to plan whether to start that investment or not. Today, if I have to grow maize in Narok, I have to go to the neighborhood and ask them, how much do you harvest? How much do you have? I don't think the county would actually be able to give you one statement and say, if you go to Mulot, you harvest this. If you go to the other part of Narok, you harvest this. Yet, the county has the ability to actually begin to collect that so that they can be able to promote investments, because nobody is going to make a credible or a significant amount of investment without that information. I also want to add a comment about our systems, Dr. Mujibi. We are a country that is dominated by smallholders. Whether you're going to look at tea, look at dairy, perhaps it's only flowers, I think, where it doesn't make sense to do small scale. But in most of our other commodities, we are in small holding. And I think we have now to stop worrying about how we can change our small holding to be medium or large scale, and also begin to and not to worry about commercialization. Because if you remember 25 to 20 years ago, there was a lot of talk about commercialization. Farm as a business. You're telling somebody who is in their 60s, 70s, farm as a business. They have 3 acres. I mean, that statement reached a level whereby, in our minds, we are thinking that we are commercializing smallholder enterprises. But then what comes later is that actually those smallholder enterprises, which we are attempting to commercialize, to tell them to sell their surplus, they don't even make enough to feed their families. So we now get into a bigger problem where our small holding, our design of having so many, it's not a design really, I think we found ourselves there, is now becoming a bigger problem. And we must do something apart from trying to make them bigger or trying to make them commercial. What do we do about our small holding, what do we do about it so that we can still invert the current pyramid. What do I mean? Right now, when you hear the government saying that it is the agriculture is the backbone of the country, they are talking about the number of people who are involved in agriculture at various levels. But at the same time, the majority of these people, perhaps 85% and above, are those who are now digging the soil to be able to plant and wait for the harvest. But then, for it to develop, this base of so many people involved in primary production must be able to do it so well that it can be able to birth or to introduce industries at a higher level, so that you can push this movement from the rural to urban, which is now being estimated that by 2050, we will be 50% rural population and the other 50% in the urban. And if we don't have a way of taking care of those who must move, whether we like it or not, so that they can find industries to work with, because they're not coming to town to farm. They're coming here to look for jobs. If those jobs are not generated, then we'll have two problems. We have poverty in the rural areas, and we have poverty in the urban areas. And I think urban poverty is going to be our next disaster if we don't think about it. And the only way we have to do it now is to ensure that smallholding works. And I think, Dr. Mujibi, because I have to close there, if Agri-Talks is going to continue in this forum, please give attention to the discussion of how then do we make a smallholder system, which is not a good place to be, but we have it anyway. How do we make it work so that we can still industrialize without these unrealistic ambitions that we can convert a smallholder to be a large scale so that we can industrialize? I think give that perhaps a forum without having to deal with many other issues, so that we can discuss and see what ideas do people have about what counties can do, what the government can do, so that we can still make it with our small holding systems. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, gentlemen. Very engaging discussion. I would like to take this opportunity to give you time to put closing statements. I am monitoring the chat here to see if there is any questions. I can see Jackie McGlade talking about a data platform that has been started by Strathmore University, I believe. Yes, by Strathmore University, which is going to be able to provide information, because David, you've said there's no place where you can get a single point of information on productivity and yield. So Strathmore has actually set up a platform where this is going to be possible to see, how much can you grow, what are the yields, what is the productivity, and so forth. And so through they're calling Future of Mau Complex project, they are actually taking to do that. This Joseph Wambuki, who is saying that the SACCO Act or legal act has become, the supplement has become legalized or something like that.
Gazetted.
There has been gazettement of the SACCO Act, something like that, right? I don't know what that exactly means. Does it mean that now it has moved from its older home in cooperatives, it's gone to finance? I don't know what it means. I've not seen the document. There are people who are saying they agree with David in terms of the borders need to be open. The markets also must be open, right? Gentlemen, your closing remarks, starting with Menjo, and then I saw Moses raising his hand. We go in that order, and hopefully at the end of it, if there's any other questions, then we can respond to them. David, Dominic.
Thank you, Dr. and thank you, fellow panelists. I just want to make the last remarks that food security is about planning. It's not more about production, but it's more about planning. And planning is about data. Having access to accurate data, we know what we have and we know what we want to produce in future to make sure that our population is food secure. And using that information of what we have against where we want to go, we need to create strategies that will support that growth where we want to go. And based on that, we need to have very accurate budgets that will support the activities to get us there. Then we need to have value proposition to investors. And investors starts from government, it goes to every player in the value chain, the stakeholders in the value chain, so that we stop this story about 3% budget and things like that. We need to show everybody in the value chain what is the need for me. Once we get there, then it will be easy. So the role of government is basically facilitatory, policy and facilitatory. And if there will be need for subsidy, to keep the many smallholder farmers to continue producing, even if it's not on a commercial basis, then the government must have a very strong basis, which is based on data. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dominic. Thank you very much. Moses, let's keep it short. Let's keep it short.
Thank you. I'll keep it short. So I think, I mean, we've discussed this quite a bit. The responsibility of feeding the country and feeding our industries rests on the shoulders of smallholder farmers. These farmers are generally poor. So we've taken a big responsibility, put it on the shoulders of smallholder farmers who don't have resources, put them on the counties where there are no resources. So really we need to rethink agriculture for us to really get out of the food challenges that we have and be able to industrialize. In that regard, I think the idea of supporting cooperatives to go to the next level is important. The idea of supporting companies that can then have outgrower schemes is something we need to revisit. The idea of investing in what we call agro-industrial infrastructure is something we need to look at. Currently, we build roads, but they don't end up somewhere. We build railways, they don't end up somewhere. So you find along the way, there are no what we call last mile infrastructure to connect with industry. So we need to look at that. The other thing we need to look at is creating a fund. In other parts of the world, for example, in the US, the State Department of Agriculture, a lot of it is just creating funds for private sector to invest. So here we need to support, we need to create funds to support agriculture. Right now, banks don't touch agriculture because it's high risk. If we de-risk agriculture by government providing, say, 20 or 30% of what's required, then there'll be enough resources for farmers to borrow and do stuff. So I think we need to support farmers. If we expect smallholder farmers to feed the country, we need to really support them to restructure. We need to organize them better, and we need to give funds to support them.
Thank you. Thank you, Moses. Thank you, Moses. Let me go to David, your closing remarks.
Thank you. I think for me, just to say that as we talk, there's somebody who is moving from their rural home because they have not found something they can do. They'll come to town and they'll begin looking for a job. Maybe they have some education. And the fact that they do not find something to do with that education or the skill they have should cause the experts, the private sector players, the government a sleepless night. How we ensure that anybody who moves because they can no longer find something viable to do, how do we ensure that they continue being productive wherever they go? And this movement is inevitable. There's no way we are going to stop it. So anything you're doing, wherever you are, to support good, any initiatives like data, and I'm happy with what Strathmore is doing, and I'm glad that we collaborate in many ways. That is very good, instead of us talking about someone else doing it. And also finally, let us continue creating demand for good policies and for change of policies. Because while we may not be able to do some things or to press the switch, by doing activities that create demand for good policies, then we cause that pressure and finally get to happen. So see you next time, and I hope that you can continue with these discussions. Thank you, Dr. Mujibi.
Thank you, David. William, please.
Thank you. I will summarize it this way, that agriculture is still key for this country. The small-scale farmers are the ones who are playing a key role in agriculture, and therefore any initiatives that needs to look at food security must, within its framework, capture the small-scale farmer, because that is the guy or the lady who is producing food for this country. So there has to be a way of aggregating these people, a way of making a system where if they are cooperatives, they are well supported and funded. And then there is the need to de-risk. I think someone has said that to de-risk agriculture, what is the role of government at this point is to see how the funds can go. In fact, I would be happy if budgeting would involve some funding for de-risking agriculture in terms of insurance, in terms of things that ensure that the producers at that level have some form of insurance supported by the government, rather than just giving subsidies just that is not giving to any production. So subsidies that does not give production is not helpful. Finally, I think looking at COVID, looking at the locusts, looking at the floods, it's probably time to rethink our strategy as a country. And therefore, there is need for an economic recovery strategy. Post-COVID, post-floods, there is need for an economic recovery strategy that will encompass the plannings that we've had, but more particularly looking at how then do we take the country to the next level in terms of food security and issues of handling disaster management.
Thank you so much, Kirwa. And finally, I'll give Dr. Njenga the opportunity to close for us.
Thank you so much, and so glad to have been here. So 3 things. The first one is that until we move from technical agriculture to understanding agribusiness and the processes of food chain, supply chain, we're not getting anywhere. And that was the reason that, as you know, Mujibi, we have started the Masters of Management in Agribusiness, and we have about 11 or so small executive programs for quick skilling into the different areas of our agricultural economy. I think we need to expand as quickly as possible across Africa this education. People don't know and people don't understand. And they don't understand the global players. The second issue is the following. Normally, if you want to help people, you have to start with yourself. I think if we don't try to solve articulately well our issues, those things of circle, those things of aggregation, those things of technical equipment, how to remodify equipment for small scale, how to bring together small scale. If we don't have a think tank around these issues and stop eating from one another's hands little peanuts, then we cannot give this to Africa, and we need to go to Africa. In fact, if we don't solve it in Kenya, let me tell you, the Europeans, the Americans, the Chinese, the Japanese are already buying most of the agricultural land in Africa. So the reason why I accepted Mujibi to come here was simply this, that we Africans mess around, then when other people coming into our space and take up our cheese, then we start complaining. And the third thing is that financing of agribusiness financing an economy must always, as my dear Twitter has said, consider giving the value to the ordinary mwananchi who owns the land, the small and medium enterprises. But for that to happen, the small and medium enterprises need to join in associations that are significant enough to contract policy and to demand policy and to demand services. If they remain individuals as they are, impossible. It won't happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. And that, ladies and gentlemen, marks the end of our discussion on this topic of food security. A few years ago, perhaps a couple of decades, Kenya was not as much feed insufficient as we are today. We are totaling about 30% in the grain sector. And if we continue in the mode we are actually going to be a food import country, right? We're going to move towards becoming a food import country. If we don't plan ourselves, other people will plan for us. And like we've seen, a lot of people are buying land in Africa, and they're using the land to produce things they need, not for our food. So it is time for us to sit down, reorganize, and see how we can plan our food security. And specific to this discussion today about the 3 plagues, we've seen that our biggest problem is that we have weak policy implementation. The governance structure is just not working with regards to agriculture. We must do something urgent about that. We really need to be able to allow markets to reopen and the borders to flow so that the food can actually come across, right? We need to catalyze the private sector to have a bigger role in planning for our agricultural production. Apart from saying the government is allocating too little money into agriculture, the private sector needs to step in and actually bite the bullet and reorganize our agriculture. We've said we also need to find some form of advocacy for smallholder farmers, who are the main players who produce food in our country, so that they can be able to do this onerous task of producing food. Again, we have also seen that perhaps one of the things we should be thinking about is to delink. Policy implementers should not be also playing at the same table, under the table, and dealing in things related to agricultural trade, because then they will enact policies that favor them, right? We've seen that we need to organize our markets, supply chains, bring on board aggregators, make sure that we're de-risking agriculture, our supply chains are taken care of. But above all, I think we are wallowing in a lacuna of lack of information. And the information and the data we have, we are not applying it correctly. Post-COVID-19, we need a recovery strategy, and that strategy will be led by all of us coming to work together. So thank you very much for this. This will be a continuing series. We will share with you information. With regards to the SBS webinars, we have webinar episode number 9, right? The links are there, and we will be talking about healthcare and medical care. What are we doing and what we should be doing? So please, tomorrow, is it tomorrow? It's actually today at 6. Those who can log in, please log into this episode and have a discussion about healthcare if you're a healthcare inclined. To our panelists, thank you so much for coming, and let's continue this conversation. Good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.